My own son, David, looked me straight in the eye that day, not a flicker of remorse on his face. "Don't expect a dime from Dad's $92 million, Marietta," he said, the name Marietta feeling like a deliberate jab, a reminder that I was now just a name on a document, not family, not Mom. He said it in a room that smelled of old money and fresh grief, a room where my husband's memory was being carved up like a Sunday roast. And as the lawyer droned on, his words echoing in the vast, hollow space of that mahogany-paneled library, I realized they weren't just taking the money. They were trying to erase me, to erase 30 years of love, sacrifice, and a promise made between a husband and a wife. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly fathom, was that my Thomas, he was always one step ahead. The memory fades, but the feeling, that cold, sharp shock of betrayal, it never truly leaves. It's a ghost that sometimes visits me in the quiet hours, just as the sun dips below the California hills, painting my small living room in hues of bruised purple and soft rose. "Grandma Marietta?" Lily's voice, clear and sweet as a silver bell, pulls me back to the present. I'm sitting on our old, overstuffed sofa, the one with the faint floral pattern that softened with age. The air around us is thick with the scent of lemon polish and the worn cedar of the hope chest in the corner. Her little hand, warm and trusting, is nestled in mine, a stark contrast to the coldness of that memory. She's staring at the mantelpiece, at the framed photograph of her grandfather, Thomas, standing proud and handsome in front of a sprawling estate I hadn't set foot in for over a decade. "Why does looking at that big house make your smile go away?" she asks, her 8-year-old eyes wide with an earnest curiosity that could melt the hardest of hearts. I take a deep breath, the scent of lavender from a nearby sachet grounding me. How do you explain a lifetime of complicated love, ambition, and deceit to a child? You start at the beginning. You tell the truth. "Because, my love," I begin, my voice a little raspy. "That house represents a promise. A beautiful promise that turned into a very painful lesson. It's a story about your papa, and about a family that forgot what it means to be family. But it's also a story about finding your own kind of treasure in places no one else would ever think to look." Lily scoots closer, her head resting on my arm. "Tell me," she whispers, her gaze unwavering. "Tell me the whole story." And so, as the twilight deepens outside the lace-curtained window, I do. Our story didn't begin in a grand house, Lily. It began in a tiny, second-floor apartment in Pasadena with peeling paint and a temperamental furnace. Your grandfather, Thomas, was an engineer then, but not the kind his father approved of. Elias Gates, my father-in-law, was a titan of industry. He built his empire from the ground up, and he expected his sons to be pillars within it. But Thomas, he had a fire in his belly, a need to create something that was entirely his own. He had a vision for sustainable building, for structures that worked with the land instead of dominating it. His father called it hippie nonsense. Thomas called it the future. We met at a small local library. I was sketching the architecture of the old building in my notebook, and he came over, intrigued. He didn't compliment my drawing, not at first. Instead, he pointed to a specific archway and said, "The keystone is magnificent, isn't it? The way it distributes all that weight, holding everything together, it's the most important part, but also the most unassuming." He looked at me then, his eyes a startling shade of blue, and smiled. "A lot like you," he added, so softly I almost thought I'd imagined it. That was Thomas. He saw the structure of things, the hidden strengths. Our courtship was a whirlwind of shared dreams whispered over cheap coffee, long walks where we'd redesign the city in our minds, and a love so profound it felt like it could hold up the world. His family tolerated me. I was a freelance artist, the daughter of a school teacher and a baker. In their world of trusts and legacies, I was a charming but ultimately insignificant footnote. Elias, in particular, made his disapproval known through a chilling politeness that was more insulting than any outright slur. But we didn't care. We had each other. When we married, it was a simple courthouse ceremony. Thomas's family sent a polite but perfunctory check. We used it to buy a slightly better furnace. We were happy. We were building our own world, brick by brick, held together by that unassuming keystone, our love. For years, Thomas poured everything he had into his small firm. He worked grueling hours, often falling asleep at his drafting table, his hair dusted with graphite. I'd bring him tea and wrap a blanket around his shoulders, my heart aching with a fierce, protective pride. Slowly, painstakingly, his hippie nonsense started to get noticed. He won small awards, then larger contracts. His reputation for brilliance and integrity grew. He was proving his father wrong, and there was a quiet, deep satisfaction in that. The turning point came with the Sterling Tower project. It was a massive undertaking, a skyscraper that was set to redefine the Los Angeles skyline. Thomas's innovative, eco-friendly design beat out dozens of larger, more established firms. It was the project that would make him. It was also the project that would, in the end, break him. Elias suddenly took a profound interest in his son's work. He'd call at all hours, offering advice, connections, resources. He framed it as a father's pride, a desire to finally support his son's vision. Thomas, who had yearned for his father's approval his entire life, was completely taken in. "He's finally seeing it, Marietta," he told me one evening, his face alight with a hopeful glow that made my stomach twist with unease. "He wants to merge Gates Industries with my firm. He said with his capital and my vision, we could change the world." "Thomas, be careful," I pleaded, my intuition screaming a silent warning. "Your father doesn't share. He conquers." "It's different this time," he insisted, his optimism a shield against my doubts. "This is about family, about legacy, our legacy." Against my better judgment, I relented. I couldn't bear to be the one to extinguish the hope in his eyes. The merger went through. On paper, it was a partnership. In reality, it was an absorption. Thomas's name was on the letterhead, his face was in the press releases. But the strings were all being pulled by Elias. The vibrant, independent company Thomas had built was slowly being assimilated into the cold, corporate machinery of Gates Industries. The money started pouring in. We moved from our little apartment to a comfortable house in a good neighborhood. Thomas started talking about buying a plot of land up the coast, a place where he could build our dream home with his own two hands, a home with a sprawling garden for me and an ocean view that stretched to forever. The promise of that future was a balm on my anxieties, but I saw the change in him. The spark in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a weary exhaustion. The long hours he worked were no longer fueled by passion, but by pressure. He was constantly in meetings, flying across the country, battling with a board of directors handpicked by his father. His brothers, David and Michael, were given executive positions, tasked with overseeing Thomas's projects. David, the eldest after Thomas, was particularly smug about it. He had always been jealous of Thomas's talent, and now he wielded his unearned authority like a club. Then came the diagnosis. A rare, aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. The doctor gave him a year, maybe 2, with aggressive treatment. Our world, which had become so large and complicated, suddenly shrank to the size of a hospital room. The business, the money, the family politics, it all became meaningless noise. All that mattered was the man I loved, the man whose body was being ravaged by an invisible enemy. I became his nurse, his advocate, his everything. I learned to administer injections, to manage his pain, to read the subtle shifts in his breathing. I gave up all my design work, my own dreams put on hold indefinitely. My world revolved around his medication schedule, his doctor's appointments, his moments of clarity, and his descents into pain-fueled delirium. In all that time, Lily, his family's presence was a ghostly one. Elias visited twice. He stood by the bed, looking uncomfortable and out of place, speaking of stock prices and market projections as if my husband's illness was an unfortunate dip in a portfolio. David and Michael sent flowers, their cards filled with hollow platitudes. They were too busy, they said, running the empire Thomas had helped expand. One night during a terrible storm that rattled the windows of our home, Thomas was lucid. The morphine had ebbed, leaving his eyes clear and his mind sharp, but his body was frail, a mere whisper of the strong man he once was. He gripped my hand, his fingers bony and cold. "Marietta," he rasped, his voice a thread of sound. "I'm so sorry." "Don't you dare be sorry," I whispered back, tears streaming down my face. "We have had a beautiful life." "He took it," he said, a single tear tracing a path through the gaunt landscape of his face. My father, he took my company. He took my soul, my heart shattered. He had known all along. He had let his pride and his hope for his father's love blind him, and he had carried the weight of that silent regret. It doesn't matter, my love, I soothed, stroking his hair. None of it matters but this, us, he shook his head weakly. No, it does matter. For you, I made sure you'd be taken care of. My personal shares, the profits from the Sterling project before the merger. It's a lot, Marietta. It's all in the will. It's ironclad. You won't have to worry about a thing. You will have our dream, I promise. He spoke of a figure so vast it seemed fantastical, 92 million. His personal fortune, earned before and during the early years of the partnership, legally distinct from the broader family trust. Or so he believed. It was the last coherent conversation we ever had. He passed away 2 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, just as the sun was rising. He died in my arms, and a part of me died with him. The funeral was a grand, ostentatious affair, orchestrated by Elias. It felt more like a corporate event than a final goodbye. I sat in the front pew, a hollowed-out shell of a woman, listening to his father and brothers eulogize a version of Thomas the First barely recognized, a titan of industry, a loyal son of the Gates empire. They didn't speak of his kindness, his laughter, his love for the simple beauty of a well-designed arch. They spoke of his value. The day of the will reading felt like a final, formal execution. I drove to the Gates estate, the grand house from the photograph, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I walked through the heavy oak doors into that library, a room where I had never felt welcome. Elias sat at the head of the table, a stone patriarch. David and Michael were on either side, their faces a mixture of feigned solemnity and ill-concealed impatience. Mr. Harrington, the family lawyer for decades, began to read. His voice was a monotone drone, listing bequests to distant relatives, donations to charities bearing the Gates name. And then he came to the main inheritance. My breath caught in my throat. This was the moment Thomas had promised me, the moment his love would shield me from the cold reality of their world. The lawyer cleared his throat. Regarding the personal assets and shares held by Thomas Gates, as per the binding corporate partnership agreement signed on October 14, 2008, all such assets, upon his death, were to be fully absorbed into the primary Gates family trust, to be managed by the executor, Elias Gates. The words didn't register at first. They were just legal jargon, a cloud of meaningless sounds. Absorbed? Binding agreement? Mr. Harrington continued. However, in recognition of his service, the trust has allocated a provision for his widow, Marietta Gates. He paused, looking down at the document. A one-time disbursement of $5,000 and a lifetime annuity of $2,000 per month. $5,000. A pittance, an insult. My mind flashed back to the years of my life I had dedicated to Thomas, the sacrifices I had made, the nights I had stayed up with him while he built the very success they were now claiming as their own. My blood ran cold. I looked up, my disbelieving gaze landing on David. And that's when he delivered the final cruel blow. He leaned forward slightly, a small, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. "Don't expect a dime from Dad's $92 million, Marietta," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "He signed it all away when he joined the family business. A smart man, my brother, but a little too trusting. You should be grateful for what you're getting." The air was sucked from my lungs. $92 million. The fortune Thomas had promised me, the future he had sworn was mine, had vanished into the legal labyrinth of his father's creation. They had used his hope, his desire for family, as a weapon against him, and now against me. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the polished floor. My entire body was trembling, not with fear, but with a sudden clarifying rage. I looked at each of them, Elias, cold and unmoved, Michael looking down at his hands, unable to meet my eyes, and David, his face alight with smug victory. "You are thieves," I said, my voice low and shaking, but carrying across the silent room. "You are not his family. You are just thieves who stole his life's work." Elias didn't even flinch. "The documents are legal and binding, Marietta. I suggest you take what is offered and move on with your life. I turned and walked out of that room, my head held high, my heart a bleeding wound in my chest. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do. I only knew one thing. Thomas loved me. He would not have done this. He would not have knowingly signed away our future. They had lied. They had tricked him. And I was going to find out how. As I drove away from that soulless mansion, the image of Thomas's face, pale and earnest in the stormy night, flashed in my mind. His promise, it's ironclad. That night, alone in the house that would soon be taken from me, I didn't just cry. I searched. I tore through Thomas's old office, a room I hadn't touched since he passed. I opened every drawer, every file cabinet, looking for something, anything, that could prove the deception. In the back of his personal filing cabinet, tucked away in a folder labeled Keystone, I found it. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a small, ornate, old-fashioned key tied with a simple leather cord. Tucked alongside it was a single folded piece of paper. On it, in Thomas's familiar, elegant script, were just 3 words. For Marietta, my keystone. A small, cold object with no explanation. What secrets did it hold? Was it just a sentimental trinket, or was it the beginning of a path Thomas had laid out for me from beyond the grave? Tell me what you think the key unlocks in the comments below. That small, cold key in my palm felt heavier than the weight of the entire Gates empire. It was a tangible piece of my husband, a final cryptic message sent from a place I could no longer reach. In the days that followed the will reading, as the shock subsided and a cold, hard grief set in, that key became my anchor. It was the only thing that felt real in a world that had become a nightmare of legal notices and feigned sympathy. The phone calls stopped. The few friends we'd shared who moved in the Gates' social circles suddenly became distant, their invitations drying up like desert streams. I was being systematically, silently excommunicated. The first official letter arrived a week later on thick, creamy stationery embossed with the Gates Industries logo. It was a formal notice, devoid of any sentiment, stating that I had 30 days to vacate our marital home. 30 days to pack up 30 years of a shared life. Each word was a sterile, calculated stab to the heart. This house, the one Thomas and I had filled with laughter and arguments and the quiet comfort of love, was now just an asset to be liquidated. Grandma, Lily's voice pulls me from the memory, her brow furrowed with a child's simple, profound sense of injustice. They made you leave your house? The house Papa loved. I nod, stroking her soft hair. They did, my sweet girl. They saw a house, a piece of property on a balance sheet. They didn't see the pencil marks on the doorframe where we measured your mother's height as she grew. They didn't smell the phantom scent of Thomas's pipe tobacco in the study. They didn't hear the echoes of his laughter in the hallway. That's the thing about people blinded by greed, Lily. They only see the price of things, never their value. She squeezes my hand tightly, her little fingers a warm comfort against my skin. That's the meanest thing I've ever heard. It felt that way, I agree, my voice soft. It felt like they were trying to bury him all over again, and me along with him. But they underestimated your grandfather, and they certainly underestimated me. The process of packing was an exercise in exquisite torture. Every object I touched held a memory. The worn, leather-bound copy of Leaves of Grass he read to me on our first date. The slightly chipped ceramic mug I'd made in a pottery class that he insisted on using every morning for his coffee. The box of his old blueprints, his elegant handwriting detailing visions of buildings that would never be. Each item was a fresh wave of grief, a reminder of the future that had been stolen. My sons-in-law, your mother's husband, and your aunts came to help with the heavy lifting. They were good, kind men, their faces a mixture of sorrow and barely concealed fury at the injustice of it all. But I insisted on packing Thomas's personal effects myself. It felt like a final, sacred duty. It was during one of these long, dust-filled afternoons in his study that I allowed myself a moment of real despair. I was holding a photograph of a much younger Thomas and me, taken on a trip to Yosemite. We were standing on a precipice, the vast, magnificent valley stretching out behind us, and we were laughing, utterly carefree, invincible in our love. The contrast between that moment and my current reality, a widow in her late 50s, being evicted from her home by her own stepson, with a pittance to her name, was a chasm too wide to comprehend. I sank to the floor, the photograph clutched to my chest, and I wept. I wept for him, for us, for the cruel, senseless waste of it all. After the tears subsided, a cold resolve settled in my bones. I would not let them win. I would not let my grief be the end of my story. I pulled out the key and the note again. For Marietta, my keystone. I thought back to that day in the library, the day we met. He had been so captivated by the keystone in the archway. It's the most important part, he'd said, holding everything together. He had called me his keystone. But Thomas was a literal man, an engineer. He built things. He understood structure. The word had to be more than just a beautiful metaphor. It had to be a clue. I spent the next several nights, after the movers had left and the house grew quiet and hollow, at the small desk in our bedroom, searching. I used the old desktop computer we shared, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I searched for keystone in connection with his business records, his personal emails, anything I could access. Nothing. I searched for architects, projects, even street names. Dead end after dead end, my daughters, bless their hearts, were worried. They'd call every day, their voices laced with concern. Mom, are you eating? Maybe you should come stay with us for a while. You don't have to do this alone. I'm not alone, I'd tell them, my voice more confident than I felt. I have Thomas. I think they thought I was losing my mind to grief. Maybe I was, but I felt his presence in that house, a quiet, steadying force urging me on. Think like an engineer, Marietta. Look at the structure. One evening, I remembered a conversation we had years ago. It was during a particularly bitter fight with his father. Thomas had come home, defeated and angry. Elias had belittled one of his designs, calling it fiscally irresponsible. He doesn't understand, Thomas had vented, pacing the living room. You can't build a lasting legacy on a foundation of pure profit. You need trust. You need integrity. You need a keystone principle, something that holds it all together when the storms come. Keystone principle. The phrase echoed in my mind. What if Keystone wasn't a place or a project? What if it was a company, a bank, a place where one would put their trust? My heart began to beat faster. I opened the web browser and, with trembling fingers, I typed in Keystone Trust California. The first result that popped up was for a small, private institution, Keystone Savings and Trust. It was an old, established firm, known for its discretion and its work with independent creators and engineers. It wasn't a flashy commercial bank like the ones the Gates family used. It was quiet, unassuming, just like a keystone. I felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline and hope so powerful it almost made me dizzy. It was a long shot, a wild guess based on a memory and a metaphor, but it was the only lead I had. The next morning, I dressed carefully. I chose a simple navy blue dress, one Thomas had always liked. I put on a string of pearls he had given me for our 25th anniversary. I needed to feel strong, to project an aura of confidence I didn't possess. As I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized, older, lines of grief etched around her eyes, but with a flicker of fire in their depths. The Keystone Savings and Trust was located in a beautiful old granite building downtown. The kind of place that spoke of quiet, enduring wealth, not flashy, modern excess. I walked in, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The air was cool and smelled of old paper and brass polish. A polite young man at the front desk asked how he could help me. My throat was suddenly dry. What if I was wrong? What if they laughed me out of the building? I believe my late husband may have had a safe deposit box here, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. His name was Thomas Gates. The young man typed the name into his computer. He frowned. I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't have a box listed under that name. My heart sank. It was a stupid, desperate idea. Of course it was wrong. I felt a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. Oh, I see. I must have been mistaken. I'm sorry to have wasted your time. I turned to leave, the weight of my defeat pressing down on me. Ma'am? The young man called out. I turned back. He was looking at his screen, a thoughtful expression on his face. While we don't have a box under the name Gates, we do have one under the name Keystone Architectural. The account was opened over 20 years ago. Is there any chance? Keystone Architectural. It was the original name of Thomas's firm, before the merger. Before the Gates name had swallowed it whole. He had kept it alive, a secret piece of his original dream, hidden away in this quiet, respectable place. Yes, I breathed, a wave of relief washing over me. Yes, that's it. Very good, he said with a smile. The account lists you, Marietta Gates, as the sole beneficiary with full access upon presentation of the primary key and a valid death certificate. My hand flew to my purse, my fingers closing around the small, ornate key. I produced it along with a copy of Thomas's death certificate. The young man examined them both, then nodded. He led me through a heavy circular vault door into a quiet, sterile room lined with gleaming metal boxes. He stopped in front of a small one, number 713. Here you are, Mrs. Gates, he said, using his own key in conjunction with mine. He turned the lock, and the small metal door clicked open. He then discreetly left the room, leaving me alone with my husband's last secret. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely pull the box from its slot. It was surprisingly heavy. I carried it over to a small private viewing desk and sat down, my heart pounding against my ribs. What would I find? Old letters? Sentimental tokens? Or the proof I so desperately needed? I lifted the lid. Inside there was no cash, no jewelry, no bearer bonds. The first thing I saw was a thick, leather-bound journal, the kind Thomas always used for his private thoughts and sketches. Beneath it were several stacks of documents, held together with rubber bands, bank statements, deeds, and what looked like original, unamended incorporation papers for Keystone Architectural. But it was the journal that called to me. I picked it up, the worn leather soft beneath my fingertips. I opened it to the first page. The entry was dated just a week after Thomas had signed the merger agreement with his father. His familiar, elegant script filled the page, but the words were jagged, filled with a tension I had never seen in his writing before. October 21st, 2008. I've made a terrible mistake. I felt it the moment I signed the papers. Dad was smiling, but it wasn't his real smile. It was the smile he uses when he's closed a deal, the one that never reaches his eyes. He called me son, but it felt like he was branding cattle. I went over the fine print again tonight, alone in my study. Marietta was asleep. I didn't want to worry her, not after she warned me. God, she was right. She's always right. There's a clause in Section 12B, the succession and dissolution chapter, that I swear wasn't in the draft I reviewed with my own lawyer. It's a poison pill. It doesn't just merge our assets. It makes my personal holdings, past and future, contingent upon my continued role in the company. And in the event of my death or incapacitation, my entire stake, including everything I built before this cursed partnership, doesn't pass to my estate. It's reabsorbed by the primary trust. Reabsorbed. What a sterile, bloodless word for theft. He tricked me. My own father tricked me. He waited until my guard was down, until I was so desperate for his approval that I would have signed anything. And David was there. He's the one who brought me the final copy to sign, telling me it was just a formality, that his lawyers had given it the final once-over. He looked me in the eye and lied. He must have known. He must have been in on it. I had to stop reading. The air in the small, quiet room felt thick, suffocating. My vision blurred with tears. It was worse than I had imagined. This wasn't just corporate maneuvering. This was a premeditated, calculated betrayal by his father and his own brother. They had conspired to swindle him, using his love and his trust as their primary weapons. I flipped through the journal. Pages and pages of Thomas's anguish, his growing realization of the trap he was in, and his secret, meticulous plan to fight back. He had started a new game, a long game, right under their noses. He began siphoning funds, legally, through loopholes in their own contracts, into new accounts under the old company name. He purchased properties, small, unassuming plots of land and old buildings, hiding them within the corporate shell of Keystone Architectural. He was building a secret ark, a financial lifeboat, piece by piece, right in plain sight. The last entry was dated just 2 months before he died. His handwriting shaky but determined. The doctors tell me I don't have much time. I look at Marietta's face when she thinks I'm not looking, and I see the toll this is taking on her. My greatest failure is that I will leave her to face them alone. But I will not leave her defenseless. This journal, these documents, this is the truth. But the truth isn't enough. They will bury it in litigation. She needs more than that. She needs a weapon they can't fight, a truth they cannot deny. There's one more piece to the puzzle. The one thing that can expose not just their greed, but their character. The proof is not in a document, but in a place. A place of failure and shame that Elias has spent a fortune to keep buried. It all goes back to the old Oakhaven project. He thinks all the records were destroyed in the fire. He's wrong. The Oakhaven project? I had a vague memory of the name, something from years ago, a project that had gone wrong and was quickly hushed up. A fire! My mind was reeling. This wasn't just a simple case of a doctored contract anymore. Thomas had uncovered something more, something that his father was desperate to keep hidden. He hadn't just left me a secret fortune. He had left me a map that led right to the heart of his family's darkest secret. I closed the journal, my grief now mingled with a white-hot, righteous anger. Thomas hadn't been a victim. He had been a silent warrior, fighting for me, for us, until his very last breath. And now the fight was mine. What was the Oakhaven project? And what devastating secret was Elias Gates so desperate to conceal that he would resort to a fire to cover it up? Share your theories in the comments. It turned out, Lily, that for the last 2 years of his life, your grandfather hadn't just been battling cancer. He'd been fighting a war on 2 fronts, one against the cells that were consuming his body, and a silent, secret one against the family that was consuming his soul. The journal I found in that safety deposit box wasn't just a record of their betrayal. It was a battle plan, and the name of the battlefield was Oakhaven. Leaving the home Thomas and I had shared was like a physical amputation. Each box carried out the door felt like a piece of my past being severed. I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet, older building across town. It was clean and safe, but it was utterly devoid of us. The walls were a sterile, anonymous white. The rooms didn't hold the echo of Thomas's footsteps. The air didn't carry the scent of our life together. It was just a place to exist, not to live. Was it sad, Grandma? Lily asks, her voice a small, sympathetic whisper in the dimming light of my living room. She has shifted from my side and is now curled up on the rug at my feet, her chin resting on my knees, looking up at me. I reach down and gently brush a stray strand of hair from her forehead. It was more than sad, my love. It felt hollow, like I had become a ghost in my own life. I'd walk through the rooms of that new apartment and feel a chill, but it wasn't from a draft. It was the chill of absence. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard, and in that silence, the voices of doubt grew very loud. For a few weeks I did nothing. I unpacked the bare essentials and left the rest in boxes that lined the walls like silent brown tombstones. I would sit for hours with Thomas's journal in my lap, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Oakhaven Project, a place of failure and shame. He thinks all the records were destroyed in the fire. He's wrong. What could I, a grieving widow with no resources and no power, possibly do against a man like Elias Gates? He was a fortress of wealth and influence. I was just a woman in a small apartment, armed with a dead man's journal. The despair was a thick, suffocating blanket. One night, I almost gave up. I closed the journal, placed it in a box, and decided I would just try to survive on the pittance they'd given me. I would live a small, quiet life and let the ghosts of the past lie buried. But as I was about to close the lid on that box, my eyes fell on the photograph of Thomas and me at Yosemite, which I'd placed on my new, small mantelpiece. The joy on our faces, the sheer, boundless optimism of that moment. It felt like a message. Thomas hadn't fought that secret war just to have me surrender. He had left me a map precisely because he believed I was strong enough to follow it. He had called me his keystone, the part that holds everything together. Giving up would mean letting the entire structure of his life, of his integrity, crumble to dust. No, I whispered into the empty room. Not while I'm still breathing. The next morning, my fight began. It started not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of old paper. I went to the Pasadena Central Library, a place that felt like coming home, the place where it all began. I sat in a dusty corner of the archives, the air thick with the smell of aging pulp and bookbinder's glue, and I began to dig. I searched for any mention of the Oakhaven Project. For the first few hours, I found nothing. It was as if it had been scrubbed from history. But Thomas was meticulous. He wouldn't have sent me on a fool's errand. I widened my search, looking through city planning records from the early 1990s, cross-referencing them with any projects associated with Gates Industries. And then I found it. A single short article in a microfiche copy of the Los Angeles Times, dated May 12, 1993. The headline was small, buried in the back of the metro section. Fire at Oakhaven Development Site halts construction. The article was frustratingly vague. It described a multi-building, low-income housing development sponsored by Gates Industries. It mentioned a minor structural incident followed by an overnight fire that had destroyed Building 3, which was nearing completion. The fire was attributed to faulty wiring by a preliminary report, and the project was indefinitely shelved due to the financial loss. Elias Gates was quoted briefly, expressing his deep regret and vowing to support the community in other ways. It was a neat, tidy story with no loose ends. Too neat. I knew Elias. He didn't just abandon multi-million-dollar projects because of one fire. He would have rebuilt, rebranding it as a triumph over adversity. Unless the fire wasn't an accident. Unless it was a solution. A way to burn the evidence of that minor structural incident. The article mentioned the name of the reporter, Arthur Vance. I committed the name to memory. For the rest of the day, I searched for more articles by him, for any follow-up on Oakhaven. There was nothing. It was a ghost story, a single mention that vanished into thin air. The official records at the county clerk's office were even more of a dead end. The architectural plans were lost in a clerical transfer, and the incident report on the fire was sealed. A man with Elias's power could make mountains of paperwork simply disappear. I was back to square one, but now I had a name. Arthur Vance. Finding him in the age before the internet had saturated everything wasn't easy. He wasn't a famous journalist, but after days of chasing leads through old press club directories and making calls to retired newspaper editors, I found him. He was living in a small, cluttered bungalow in Long Beach, a place that smelled of salt air, old books, and stale cigar smoke. He answered the door looking exactly like a retired newspaperman from an old movie. Rumpled, suspenders over a faded shirt, and eyes that were simultaneously tired and sharply intelligent. He looked me up and down with a cynical, world-weary gaze. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying," he grumbled, his voice a gravelly rasp. "I'm not selling anything." "Mr. Vance," I said, my heart hammering in my chest. "My name is Marietta Gates. I'm Thomas Gates's widow. I need to talk to you about the Oakhaven project." His eyes narrowed at the name Gates. A flicker of something, interest or maybe just a painful memory, passed over his face. He was silent for a long moment, studying me. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time," he finally said, his voice softer now. "A story that died on the vine. Come in." His house was a chaotic library, stacks of books and yellowed newspapers covering every available surface. He cleared a pile of magazines off a worn armchair and motioned for me to sit. He poured us both a glass of iced tea, then sat opposite me, steepling his fingers under his chin. "So," he began, "Thomas Gates's widow. I'm sorry for your loss. He was one of the good ones, from what I heard. A real engineer, not like his old man." "That's why I'm here," I said, and I began my story. I told him everything. The will, the betrayal, the journal, the key. I told him what Thomas had written about Oakhaven, about the fire, about a secret Elias was desperate to keep buried. Arthur listened intently, his sharp eyes never leaving my face. When I was finished, he let out a long, slow whistle. "I knew it," he breathed, shaking his head. "I always knew there was more to that story. They shut me down so fast, so completely. My editor, a good man, was suddenly offered a promotion he couldn't refuse. The key witness, a construction foreman, suddenly couldn't be reached. The whole thing was buried in less than a week." "What was it they were burying, Arthur?" I asked, leaning forward. What really happened at Oakhaven? He took a long sip of his tea, his eyes looking past me, back into a 30-year-old memory. "It wasn't faulty wiring, Mrs. Gates. It was a cover-up for a cover-up." He explained that Elias, in his relentless drive for profit, had forced the Oakhaven contractors to use substandard steel and a cheaper, fast-curing concrete mix that hadn't been properly tested. He had cut every possible corner to maximize his margins on a project that was supposed to be his grand philanthropic gesture. A week before the fire, Arthur continued. His voice low, there was a partial collapse. A whole section of the third-floor concrete slab in Building 3 just pancaked. It happened late at night, so by pure luck, no one was on site. It was a miracle nobody was killed, but it was a huge red flag. An investigation was launched. City inspectors were all over it. They were going to find the cheap rebar, the shoddy concrete. It would have been the end of Gates Industries. Elias would have been ruined, possibly even faced criminal charges. So the fire, I whispered, the horrifying truth dawning on me. Wasn't an accident, he confirmed, his gaze hard as granite. It was arson. A professional job. It destroyed the evidence, turned the pancaked concrete slab into a pile of anonymous rubble. The investigation was stonewalled, and the whole thing was chalked up to a tragic accident. My stomach churned. This was the failure and shame Thomas had written about. Not a business failure, but a moral one. A complete abdication of the principles of safety and integrity that my husband had built his entire life around. Elias hadn't just been greedy. He had been reckless, willing to endanger the lives of the very people he was pretending to help, all for the sake of his bottom line. But Thomas wrote that his father was wrong, I pressed, my voice urgent. That not all the records were destroyed? He said the proof still exists. Arthur leaned back, a grim smile on his face. That's the part that always haunted me. There was a city inspector, a young kid, name of Robert Chen. Bright, ambitious, and couldn't be bought. He was the one who was about to blow the whistle. He had taken his own core samples from the concrete, his own photographs of the shoddy rebar before the collapse. He was building a case. What happened to him? I asked, a sense of dread coiling in my gut. That, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is the part that never made the papers. The night of the fire, Robert Chen was reported missing. His car was found a few blocks from the Oakhaven site. He was never seen again. The police suspected he'd gotten in over his head with gambling debts and fled, but his family never believed it. They thought he was at the site that night, gathering more evidence when the fire started. My God, it wasn't just about fraud anymore. It was about a man's life. Elias hadn't just buried a building. He'd buried a witness. I believe Thomas must have found Chen's evidence, Arthur said, his eyes locking with mine. Or at least he figured out where it was. The kid was smart. He wouldn't have kept something that dangerous at his home or office. He would have hidden it somewhere safe, somewhere off the books. My mind raced, connecting the dots. Thomas, the brilliant engineer, the man who saw the structure of things. He would have been able to trace the Phantom Project, to figure out what had really happened. And he would have found what Robert Chen had hidden. But where? I asked, my voice trembling. Where is the proof now? Arthur stood up and walked over to a large, cluttered map of Los Angeles County pinned to his wall. He tapped a finger on an area east of the city, an industrial zone near some old, abandoned quarries. Chen's father was a stonemason, Arthur said. They owned a small workshop out here for years. It was shut down long ago, but the family still owns the property. If I were a betting man, I'd say the kid hid his proof there, in a place no one would ever think to look, a place connected to his own family's legacy of building things the right way. He looked back at me, his expression grave. But I have to warn you, Marietta. If you go looking for this, you won't just be fighting Elias in a courtroom. You'll be digging up a body he buried 30 years ago. Men like that don't just have lawyers. They have people who solve problems. Be careful. I stood up, my mind a whirlwind of fear and fierce determination. This was it. The final piece of the map Thomas had left for me. It was more dangerous and darker than I could have imagined, but it was the only path to justice. Thank you, Arthur, I said, my voice filled with a gratitude so immense it almost choked me. You've given me the truth. Now I have to go find the proof. As I drove away from his small bungalow, the setting sun casting long, ominous shadows across the road, I knew my life had irrevocably changed. I was no longer just a grieving widow. I was the keeper of a terrible secret and the executor of my husband's final desperate plan. My next stop wouldn't be a library or an office. It would be a forgotten workshop in the middle of nowhere, a place that held the key to either my vindication or my destruction? What will Marietta find in the abandoned workshop? And what dangers await her as she gets closer to exposing a secret that a powerful man has killed to protect? There comes a moment, Lily, when you've been pushed so far that fear changes its shape. It stops being a wall that holds you back and becomes the fuel that propels you forward. Standing in the shimmering midday heat before the dilapidated gates of that forgotten stonemason's workshop, I wasn't just afraid for myself. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't walk through that door. I was afraid of the truth remaining buried forever, afraid of Thomas's final, desperate fight meaning nothing. Fear had become a duty, and I was determined to see it through. The workshop was a ghost of a place. The fence had long since rusted through, and I passed through it with a mournful creak of metal. The building itself was a long, low structure of cinder block and corrugated tin, its windows opaque with decades of grime. Weeds grew thick and tenacious through cracks in the concrete yard, where unfinished blocks of granite and marble lay scattered like the bones of ancient beasts. The air was still and heavy, smelling of dust, sun-baked earth, and the faint metallic scent of rain from a storm long past. "Weren't you scared, Grandma?" Lily's voice is a small thread in the quiet of my living room, her eyes wide with the imagined terrors of that abandoned place. "All by yourself?" I looked down at her, a faint smile touching my lips. "I was terrified, my love. But I told myself something your papa always used to say when he was facing a difficult engineering problem. Don't look at the whole mountain, Marietta. Just look at the next stone you have to move." So I took a deep breath, and I moved the first stone. I pushed open that door. The inside of the workshop was a cavern of shadows and light. Sunbeams, thick with dancing dust motes, pierced the gloom through grimy skylights, illuminating a scene frozen in time. Workbenches were littered with the fossilized remains of a craftsman's life. Rusted calipers, dulled chisels, a petrified leather apron slung over a stool. Saws and cutting machines stood silent and imposing, draped in shrouds of cobwebs. It was a cathedral of forgotten work, a testament to a life spent building things the right way, a stark contrast to the life Elias had built on shortcuts and lies. My mission was clear, but the path was not. Where would a man like Robert Chen, the son of a stonemason, hide the most important thing in his life? I ran my hands along the cool, rough surfaces of the workbenches. I peered into dusty crates filled with old tools and invoices. Nothing. The scale of the place felt overwhelming. It was a needle in a haystack of stone and shadow. As I moved deeper into the workshop, my footfalls echoing in the immense quiet, a memory surfaced, sharp and painful. It was from one of Thomas's last good days, a rare afternoon of clarity before the final descent into fog. He was sitting up in bed, his frame skeletal beneath his pajamas, but his eyes were blazing with a feverish intensity. He'd gripped my hand, his hold surprisingly strong. "I should have fought him sooner, Marietta," he'd whispered, his voice cracking with a lifetime of regret. "The day he showed me the Oakhaven plans, I saw it. I saw the shortcuts, the compromise specifications for the steel supports. I told him it was dangerous. I told him he was putting lives at risk. What did he say?" I'd asked, my heart aching for the pain he was reliving. He laughed, Thomas rasped, a sound more of agony than mirth. He told me, "Sentiment doesn't build empires, son. Sacrifices do." He looked at people, at their safety, as a sentiment. A corner to be cut, and I argued, but I didn't fight. I didn't walk away. I let him bully me into silence because I wanted his approval more than I wanted to be right. That shame. It's a heavier burden than this sickness, Marietta. That memory solidified my resolve. I wasn't just looking for evidence. I was looking for absolution for my husband. I was finishing the fight he couldn't. My gaze fell upon the foundation of the building itself. Along the back wall, massive, hand-cut granite blocks formed the base, a testament to the old-world craftsmanship of Robert Chen's father. I thought of Thomas's words on the day we met, the keystone, the most important part, holding everything together. I thought of his note, my keystone. I began to walk the length of the wall, running my hand over the cool, rough-hewn stone. It was a ridiculous, impossible idea, but everything about this journey had been impossible. I was looking for a flaw, a trick of the trade, a builder's secret. And then I saw it. One of the blocks near a dark corner was subtly different. The mortar around it was a slightly different shade, a little less weathered. It was almost imperceptible, a detail only an artist or an engineer would notice. My heart began to pound. I pushed against it. It didn't budge. It was a solid block of granite, but there had to be a way. I looked around desperately, and my eyes landed on a heavy iron pry bar leaning against a workbench. It took all my strength, leveraging the bar into the thin seam of mortar, but finally I felt a slight give. I pushed harder, my muscles screaming in protest, until with a low, grinding scrape, the block shifted inward. It wasn't a solid block at all. It was a facade, a cleverly hollowed-out stone designed to look like a part of the foundation. It was a stone safe. My hands trembled as I reached into the dark, cool cavity behind it. My fingers brushed against the cold, hard edges of a metal box. It was a simple, gray, fireproof lockbox, the kind you'd buy at an office supply store. I pulled it out. It was heavy. It was real. I carried it over to a workbench, the dust motes swirling around me in a frantic dance. I fumbled with the latch, my breath held tight in my chest. It wasn't locked. With a click, the lid sprang open. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed cotton, was the ghost of Robert Chen. There was a slim, spiral-bound notebook, its pages filled with neat, precise calculations and dates. There were small plastic bags containing chunks of concrete, the core samples Arthur had mentioned. And at the bottom, there was a small silver canister containing a roll of undeveloped film. It was all there, the scientific proof of Elias's fraud, preserved in a stone tomb for 30 years. A wave of triumphant, grief-stricken emotion washed over me, so powerful my knees went weak. I had done it. I had found it. "Thomas, my love, we did it. I wouldn't celebrate just yet." The voice, coming from the shadows of the workshop entrance, made my blood run cold. It wasn't the harsh, commanding tone of Elias, or the smug sneer of David. It was softer, more hesitant, and somehow, that made it even more terrifying. Michael, Thomas's youngest brother, stepped into a shaft of light, his face pale and drawn, his expensive suit looking utterly out of place in the grimy workshop. He wasn't looking at me with anger, but with a kind of desperate, pleading panic. "Marietta, please," he said, taking a step forward, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "You have to stop. You don't know what you're doing. You'll destroy everything." "Destroy what, Michael?" I shot back, my voice shaking but sharp with adrenaline. I stood my ground, my hand resting protectively on the open box. "This family's precious legacy? This empire built on lies and death? It wasn't like that," he stammered, his eyes darting from the box to my face. "Dad, he made a mistake. A terrible mistake. He's regretted it his whole life." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "Regretted it? Is that why he stole my husband's fortune? Is that why he erased my life? Is that why he let a good man, Robert Chen, disappear to cover up his mistake?" Michael flinched as if I'd struck him. "You don't understand the pressure he was under. The company was on the verge of collapse. He had hundreds of employees to think about. He did what he had to do to survive. His words, his pathetic justifications, ignited a fury in me so pure and hot, it burned away the last of my fear. He did what he had to do? My husband, your brother, was a man who believed in integrity. He believed that the foundation of a thing, whether it was a building or a family, was the only thing that mattered. And your father, the man you are protecting, built his foundation on rubble and buried a man's body in it. "Stop it!" he cried, his composure finally cracking. "Just give me the box, Marietta. Dad will take care of you. He'll give you whatever you want. A house, money, anything. Just let this go. For the family." "For the family?" I repeated, my voice dripping with contempt. "This isn't a family, Michael. It's a crime syndicate. And you've been a willing accomplice. You stood by and watched your father and David trick your brother on his deathbed. You sat in silence at that will reading and let them throw me away like garbage. You are just as guilty as they are." He winced, his face crumbling. For the first time, I saw not a corporate suit or an enemy, but a weak, broken man trapped in his father's shadow his entire life. He was a coward, and in that moment, I realized cowardice was the most dangerous poison of all. "I saw Dad's ledgers," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper, his gaze fixed on the floor. After Thomas died, I saw the original profit margins for Oakhaven. I saw the payments to the men who started the fire. I know what he did, and it's eaten me alive ever since. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a wretched, desperate sorrow. But he's my father. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be your brother's brother, I yelled, the words tearing from my throat, raw and full of 30 years of frustration. You were supposed to be a decent man. I held up Robert Chen's notebook. This isn't about money anymore, Michael. It's about him. It's about a young man who died for the truth. And it's about your brother, who died in shame because he felt he couldn't stop it. I am not letting both of their lives be for nothing. He stared at the notebook, then at the box, then back at my face. He saw no compromise there, no fear, only the unshakable resolve of a woman with nothing left to lose. He saw the truth, and he finally stopped running from it. He didn't make another move towards me. He didn't threaten me. He simply stood there in a shaft of dusty sunlight, and a single tear traced a path down his pale cheek. The fight went out of him, replaced by the crushing weight of a lifetime of complicity. He slowly, deliberately took a step back, and then another. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of surrender, of defeat, of something that might one day look like shame. Then he turned and walked out of the workshop, leaving me alone with the silence, the dust, and the weapon that could bring it all crashing down. I had the proof. I had faced down my enemy and won, not with force, but with the simple, unbearable weight of the truth. But as I stood there, Lily, with that metal box in my hands, a new and terrifying question began to form in my mind. Firing this weapon meant destroying a family. It meant public disgrace, trials, jail time. It meant dragging Thomas's name, the Gates name, through the mud for the world to see. The question was no longer if I could get justice, but what justice would truly look like, and what I would become in the process of getting it. What should I do with the evidence? Expose them to the world and risk a devastating public war, or is there another way to find true justice? Share your thoughts in the comments on this moral crossroads. Walking out of that workshop, Lily, I felt a strange combination of triumph and terror. I held the truth in a small metal box, a truth heavy enough to crush an empire. For the first time since your papa died, I wasn't the victim. I was the one holding all the stones. The power was intoxicating, but it was also a heavy, terrifying burden. In my hands, I held the power to utterly destroy the Gates family, to send Elias to prison, to publicly disgrace David and Michael, to drag the name your grandfather had once carried with pride through a mire of scandal and crime. Vengeance was a simple, straight path, and it called to me from the darkest corners of my grief. Did you do it, Grandma? Lily's voice is tense, her little body practically vibrating with anticipation. We're still in the same positions, her on the floor looking up at me, the lamplight casting a warm, intimate glow around us. Did you send them all to jail? I look into her wide, innocent eyes, and I see the simple black and white justice of a child's world. The bad guys get caught, the good guys win. I smile, a sad, knowing smile. That's what I thought I wanted, my love. I drove home from that workshop with a fire in my belly. I was going to call Arthur Vance. I was going to call the district attorney. I was going to burn their whole world to the ground, just as they had burned Oakhaven. I spent that entire night sitting at my small kitchen table, the metal box in front of me like some Pandora's box of ruin. I opened it and laid everything out. Robert Chen's neat, damning notebook, the gritty, sad little samples of concrete, and the photographs I had gotten developed from the film canister. The pictures were grainy and stark. They showed exposed rebar, thin as pencils, where thick, strong rods should have been. They showed cracks and fissures in the concrete, clear evidence of a catastrophic failure in the making. They were pictures of a crime. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light into my apartment, I thought of Thomas. I thought of his shame, his regret that he hadn't fought harder. But I also thought of his nature. He was a builder, not a demolitions expert. His entire life was about creating things that would last, things that would protect people. Ruining his family, even a family that had wronged him so deeply, would it honor him? Or would it just be creating more rubble? Smashing Elias's corrupt empire felt like justice, but it didn't feel like Thomas. I realized then that true justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration. It's about taking the broken pieces and building something new and strong in their place. Vengeance would feed my anger for a moment, but it would leave me with nothing but ashes. I didn't want ashes. I wanted to build a legacy your grandfather would have been proud of. So, I made a different plan. A quieter, more difficult, and far more powerful one. The next morning, I picked up the phone. I didn't call a lawyer or a reporter. I called the main switchboard at Gates Industries. "Elias Gates, please," I said, my voice as calm and cold as a frozen lake. When his secretary tried to put me off, I said 6 words that I knew would grant me immediate access. "Tell him I have Robert Chen's notebook." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then a flustered, "One moment." "Please!" Elias himself came on the line, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "What is this? What game are you playing, Marietta?" "This is no game, Elias," I said evenly. "You and I are going to have a conversation. Not in your office, not in some neutral territory. You are going to come to my apartment, today, at noon. Come alone." I could hear the fury, the sheer indignation in his breathing. The great Elias Gates being summoned like a common subordinate. He started to bluster, to threaten, but I cut him off. Noon. Elias, or the contents of this box go directly to the Los Angeles Times. I'm sure Arthur Vance would be delighted to finish the story he started 30 years ago. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, but my heart was steady. The mountain was now coming to me. He arrived at precisely 12 p.m. When I opened the door, he stood there on the threshold of my humble apartment, a titan of industry looking utterly diminished and out of place. His expensive suit seemed to wilt in the ordinary hallway. He was older, grayer than I remembered, but his eyes still held the same cold, reptilian arrogance. He strode into my living room, his gaze sweeping over my modest furniture with disdain. "All right, Marietta. You've had your little drama. How much do you want? Name your price." He thought this was about money. That was the only language he truly understood. "There is no price for a man's life, Elias," I said quietly. I gestured to my simple coffee table. On it, I had arranged the evidence like a museum exhibit. The notebook, the core samples, and one damning 8x10 photograph of the faulty rebar. He stared at it, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw the mask of control crack. A flicker of genuine primal fear flashed in his eyes before he quickly extinguished it. "This is your one and only chance to listen, Elias," I said, my voice calm, but with an edge of steel he could not mistake. "You will not interrupt. You will not threaten. You will sit in that armchair and you will hear the truth you have spent a lifetime burying." To my astonishment, he did. He sank into the armchair opposite me, his posture rigid, his face a stony mask. And I told him the story. I told him about Robert Chen, the bright young inspector. I told him about the core samples, about the notebook, about the stonemason's workshop. I spoke not with rage, but with a profound, sorrowful clarity, painting a picture not just of his crime, but of the honorable life he had extinguished. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. "So that's it," he finally sneered, his arrogance returning like a reflex. "You'll go to the press, try to ruin me. It will be your word against mine. These trinkets could have come from anywhere." "Don't insult my intelligence, Elias," I said, leaning forward. "We both know this evidence would be enough to open an investigation that would tear your life apart. But I am not here to ruin you. I am here to offer you a chance to build something in the place of what you destroyed." And I laid out my terms. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a directive. First, he would locate the surviving relatives of Robert Chen. I didn't care how. He would establish a $50 million charitable foundation in Robert Chen's name, dedicated to providing scholarships for structural engineers and grants for workplace safety advocates. The donation would be anonymous. It was not for his glory. It was for the absolution of his soul. Second, he would transfer the full $92 million that belonged to Thomas, plus 30 years of interest, into a new independent trust. I would be the sole executor. His face turned purple with rage. "Absolutely not. That money is the lifeblood of this company." "No, Elias," I corrected him gently. "It was the lifeblood of my husband, which you siphoned away. The trust will be called the Keystone Foundation. Its mission will be to fund the construction of ethical, high-quality, low-income housing across the state. It will build the homes that Oak Haven should have been. It will be a monument to integrity, a living apology for your crime, and the true legacy of Thomas Gates. Third and last, he would write and sign a full, detailed confession of everything that happened at Oak Haven, the fraud, the cover-up, the arson, and his role in the disappearance of Robert Chen. That confession would be sealed and placed in the hands of my lawyer, to be released to the authorities only in the event that he failed to meet a single one of my terms. It was my insurance, my keystone. He stared at me, his mind clearly racing, looking for an angle, a way out. But there was none. I held all the cards. He could see in my eyes that my resolve was absolute. To refuse was to face public ruin and a prison cell. To accept was to save his name and his freedom, at the cost of his fortune and his pride. For a man like Elias, it was a fate worse than death. He sat there for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he gave a single sharp nod. His face was the color of ash. "You will draw up the papers," he rasped, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "My lawyer already has," I said, pulling the prepared documents from a folder on the end table. He had lost. Completely and utterly. He had come to my home to bully and buy me, and he was leaving a broken man, stripped of the thing he held most dear, not his money, but his power. He signed the papers, his hand shaking with a rage he could not express. He didn't say another word. He just stood up, and without looking at me, he walked out of my life forever. And so, my sweet Lily, that is what I did with the victory. I didn't send him to jail. I sentenced him to a life of quiet, secret atonement. I made him use his dirty money to create a tidal wave of good in the world. The Keystone Foundation became my life's work. We've built 6 housing communities so far, beautiful, safe homes for families who needed them. Every cornerstone we lay feels like a tribute to your grandfather. The Robert Chen Foundation has sent hundreds of bright, ethical young men and women to college. I get letters from them sometimes, telling me about the work they are doing, making the world a safer place. That, Lily, is a richer inheritance than any sum of money. David, without the endless flow of his father's power and money, revealed himself to be an incompetent businessman. He ran his share of the company into the ground within a decade, and now lives a quiet, bitter life, a ghost of his former arrogance. Michael, on the other hand, left the company. He moved away, and from what I hear, became a high school science teacher. Every year, on the anniversary of Thomas's death, an anonymous donation for $5,000 arrives at the Keystone Foundation. I know it's from him. It's not forgiveness, but it's a start. My life is not large or grand. I live here, in this small, comfortable home filled with memories and your beautiful laughter. But my life is full. It is rich with purpose. I took the pain and betrayal they handed me, and with Thomas's love as my blueprint, I built a new foundation. I look at the photograph on the mantelpiece, the one you asked me about. I see the grand house, and I no longer feel the sting of loss. It's just a pile of stone and wood. It's a symbol of a false, hollow legacy. The true legacy is here, in this room, in the stories we share, in the good work we put out into the world. It's in the quiet strength that is passed down from one generation to the next. Lily gets up from the floor and wraps her small arms around my waist, hugging me tightly. "You didn't just move a stone, Grandma," she says, her voice muffled against my dress. "You moved the whole mountain." I hold her close, my heart overflowing. I kiss the top of her head, and for the first time in a very long time, my eyes are not sad when I look at the old photograph. They are at peace. "Yes, my love," I whisper, my voice thick with emotion. "We did." This story is about the incredible strength that lies within us, a resilience we often don't know we have until we are tested. It's a reminder that true wealth is measured not by what we accumulate, but by the integrity with which we live and the love we leave behind. Your story matters. What was the most inspiring part of Marietta's journey for you? Share your story of resilience and quiet strength in the comments below. Let's build a foundation of hope together.